Hello everyone! Again, I finally got some time to make some cards, and today's video is going to be a 2-for-1. Our challenge for this month with my favorite things was to create a couple of Easter cards, and once I got thinking, I really wanted to use this Lisa Johnson Spring Tulips stamp set because it's spring and it makes me think of Easter, so I decided I was going to do some watercoloring with dye inks. I've shown this many times before, but I thought I would just do a double video showing two different ways to kind of achieve a watercolor look with dye ink pads. So I die cut some Tim Holtz watercolor cardstock with the inside and out diagonal stitched rectangles stacks dies. Say that 3 times fast. And after I'd run it through, I die cut it so the smooth side is facing up. And then I'm just taping down this piece of die cut cardstock or die cut watercolor cardstock to my little Epicure Epicurean cutting board. It just helps to kind of minimize warping, although when you see the watercoloring I do, this step was somewhat unnecessary, but I also did it because I wanted to mask off the diagonal die cuts. And I'll get to the why for that in a minute. So once I had it taped down with the painter's tape, I used my anti-static powder tool and just rubbed that over the watercolor cardstock. And then I inked up this outline tulip image from the set with Versamark ink and stamped it. And then I'm just going to emboss it with some detail white embossing powder, making sure to tap off all the excess. And then heat it with my heat tool. That's where this little cutting board is really nice because it's heat resistant. So you don't have to worry that you're gonna like warp or melt what this is taped to, because that is a concern if you're planning on doing like, heat embossing or using your heat tool to dry your watercolor. So once that was all melted, I'm just using an acrylic block. Any non-porous surface would work. This acrylic block works great. I've had it for years. Couldn't tell you where I got it. I've literally had it for like 10 years. And I just set it over the pack of watercolor cardstock, so I've got the white background, so I actually see the ink that I've pressed onto my little makeshift palette here. And I just pressed sour apple and green room dye ink pads. These are from My Favorite Things, so they're just water-based dye ink pads. And taking my little paintbrush, I wet the area first with just clean water. And then I picked up the sour apple, which is the lighter green, and just brushed it on. And then I did the same thing with the green room, just concentrating it more towards the bottom so that I had kind of a nice little bit of a gradient. Really, really simple. And an image like this is a really good one to kind of begin with. I've had people say like, oh, I'm so intimidated by watercolor or just different techniques, different things. This is a great sort of image to start with. And I've said a million times, I am no expert when it comes to watercolor techniques. I just put on water and color and let it kind of mix together. I don't have the patience that a person really should have. I'm working on it. But yeah, I'm no expert. I just like to color. So images like this are kind of foolproof. One, they're smaller and they're just simpler and it just works. And flowers are a lot more forgiving. That's what I tend to like to enjoy watercoloring the most. Whereas, people images and that sort of thing, I still struggle with. It's something that I hope to eventually find the time to start working on because, you can achieve beautiful effects. I struggle. But flowers are fun and they're a lot more forgiving. So I did the stems and the leaves, and then I went on to do the petals of these tulips, and I used cotton candy and ripe raspberry dye inks. And a nice thing too about doing it this way is when you have the image embossed like this, all the different little parts are kind of, semi-contained. So you don't have to worry too much about areas bleeding into each other. Because that's something I definitely struggle with the patience thing. Is normally, you watercolor at one spot, you let it fully dry, then you watercolor next to it so that things aren't bleeding into each other. And I always struggle with the patience to allow things to dry properly and, to do it to get those great effects you can see. So by embossing the image, everything's already kind of self-contained and there's like, a little bit of a border around it. So you can kind of do it all at once and get away with it. So that's basically what I did. I just wet the area again, went in with the lighter color, which was the cotton candy, and then added the little bit of ripe raspberry. And that's it. Really, really simple. Tariko, who's also known as Birdie Brown, she designs the Birdie Brown line for MFT. This is actually, I was totally inspired by a card she did. And if I remember, I'll try and link to it. But she'd posted on Instagram, but she did a whole row of these flowers in Boston white and watercolored them, and they were just gorgeous. Like, it's been in the back of my mind since I saw that, so I was totally inspired by her to do this card. So mine is just a very much simpler version. So anyway, the reason why I had taped here, obviously, is so I could sponge the snow cone ink. I just used my mini ink blending tool and sponged some snow cone ink. And then you can see as I peel the tape away, I've got this perfect little border around the die cut diagonals, which just turned out perfect. I love snow cone, is probably one of my favorite ink colors of all time. I reach for that and the cardstock constantly. So finished that, set it aside, and then I decided to die cut another piece, this time of just smooth white cardstock with the largest die of the inside and out diagonal stitched rectangle stacks. I always have to look at my little notes when I say that one because it's a tongue twister. And I'm sorry, I totally didn't realize until I went to edit this that the end part of this card is completely out of focus. I didn't even notice. I was so in the middle of making this. So all I did was pop up the little watercolor and sponged piece on foam tape and then pop that onto the larger die cut piece of cardstock. And then I put more foam tape on this one and adhered that to my card base, which is a standard A2 size card base. So 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I went on to finish the inside of the card, and I'm just using a couple little sentiment stamps. This is from the Easter Bunny stamp set that came out last year. And they're 2 separate stamps, and I cut the one apart, bumped them both together, and it just says Easter Wishes. And I inked that up with the black licorice hybrid ink. And then to fully finish it off, I just inked up that same tulip, this time with just the sour apple ink, and stamped that right over the sentiment. And that finished off this card. So just kind of clean and simple. I wanted the focus to be on the watercolor tulips. So once I did that, I wanted to do a different technique, but with the same stamp set, because there's all these solid images that are included in the set. So I took another piece of the watercolor cardstock and die cut it with the largest inside and out stacked diagonal stitched rectangle stacks dies and taped it again just along the border there onto my little cutting board. So I've got the smooth side of the watercolor paper facing up. And this is a technique that I have done for years. I was shown this way back when I first started stamping back 10 years ago. It's super, super simple. So this obviously works the best with solid image stamps, which the set has a bunch of bases and leaves and flowers that are all separate stamps that are all solid images. So I just ink up the base of the tulip here with the sour apple ink, which is lighter. And then I ink up just parts of it with the green room ink, slightly darker. And then I'm just going to mist it with my little mini mister spray bottle here. It's something you need to experiment with. The amount of water you use, the amount of times you spray the image with. It's totally an experiment to see what works. I've got my big towel here covering half my desk, and I'm trying to kind of keep the spray towards the towel. I highly recommend that, especially if you're planning on doing this quite a few times on one card. You definitely want to protect either your floor or your work surface or something with a towel, because even though it's a small amount of water you spray when you've done like an entire card, it ends up being quite a lot. So you don't need puddles on your floor or on your desk. So this towel that I show that covers my color card, I showed that in the previous video, my how I organize my coloring mediums. That's this big towel. So I either just toss it on the floor or toss it on my desk to kind of keep everything from getting soaked and then spray away. So some images I sprayed more, some I sprayed less. I just did all the bases using the different stamps from the set and stamped them all. And then for the flowers themselves, I used cotton candy, ripe raspberry, and then I pulled out bubblegum and raspberry inks just to have a little bit of variation in the flowers here. And I just did the same thing, inked them up with the lighter color and then added a bit of the darker color and then spritzed it over my towel and stamped it. And looking back now, this one big flower that I just stamped, if I should have soaked up the excess color with, a piece of paper towel or a brush or something, and it would have prevented that big smeared, I think it's just called a bloom. I think that's what they call it in watercoloring. Again, I'm not a professional, but I think that's the lingo. And yeah, I could have totally avoided that in a couple spots if I had picked up that excess color before it just went splotch. But I just went with it. If I'd had time, I probably would have redone this to make it look all, you know, nice. But I was like, you know what, just embrace it. It's also dye inks, so they kind of tend to do their own thing. These aren't obviously watercolors. They're not meant for that, but they work, you know, really well. Use what you've got. And yeah, it's fun to play with. But yeah, you're not going to get the exact same effects as you would with using like real watercolors. So they kind of tend to want to splotch a bit and not be perfectly formed, but that's the whole point, I think. Anyway, same thing with this. I just smushed the ripe raspberry ink onto an acrylic box, spritzed some water, so I got a nice big blob of color, and then flicked it onto the cardstock with my paintbrush. And yeah, you can kind of see like they're kind of just splotchy little blobs. They're not, you know, nice and uniform or whatever. And it worked though. It kind of went with the splotchy effect, in my opinion. So once everything was completely dry, I peeled off the tape, which I had, again, I don't think I mentioned, I did the same thing. I sponged on some of that snow cone ink just really lightly on this one. I love that color. It's so pretty. So once everything dry, tape peeled off, I stamped the sentiment with black licorice hybrid ink, and the sentiment is again from that same Easter Bunny stamp set. And then I popped this on foam tape, and this time I popped it onto a snow cone cardstock card base. And again, it's an A2 size card, so 5.5 by 4.25 inches. And then to finish off the inside, I die cut some white cardstock with the same large inside and out diagonal stitch rectangle stacks dies. By the end of this video, I should have this perfect, because I think I've said it like 15 times. And the Happy Easter sentiment, this big sentiment, is from the same Easter Bunny stamp set. So ink that up with the black licorice hybrid ink and stamp that. And then I just did the same thing with just one more tulip to kind of tie it all together and finish off the inside. Even though this isn't watercolor cardstock, I just used the regular smooth white cardstock for this inside part because I didn't want to bother, I guess. It still works. You get a different effect, which is something else I would encourage you to play with. Like, try different cardstocks, watercolor paper, different things. It works differently how it absorbs the color in the water. So I've done it with both. I like the effect with both. Yeah, it's personal preference. So stamped the tulip and then added my adhesive, and then I'm going to apply that to the inside of my card, and that finishes it off. So as always, there will be a link below the video to my blog post with links to the supplies used and all that jazz. So if you're interested, check out the description box below. And thank you guys so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping my videos, and I will hopefully see you guys soon in another one. Bye.